Never thought I'd become a guest in my own bloodline. Yet here I was, sitting at the very edge of my son's leather couch, careful not to wrinkle the throw pillows, careful not to leave a trace. The smell of lavender cleaner hung heavy in the air, as if every part of this house had to be sanitized, especially me. My name is Margaret Halston. I'm 73, and for most of my life I thought kindness would be enough to keep a family together. When Harold, my husband of 47 years, passed away, the world blurred. He died in his sleep, without drama, without noise, just a quiet slip into stillness. I found him at 6:12 a.m., lying with his hand half stretched toward me, still warm, still peaceful. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I made his favorite morning tea. Earl Grey steeped for exactly 4 minutes. I placed it beside him anyway on his nightstand, as I had done every day for nearly half a century. Then I sat at the edge of the bed and whispered, "You don't have to worry about me, love. I'll keep going, I'll carry it all," and I meant it. The funeral was polite, brief, a little cold. Harold never liked a fuss, so I didn't make one. Ethan, our only son, looked broken in a way I hadn't seen since his father taught him to shave. Beth, his wife, hovered behind him, holding onto his arm like a lifeline. Sophia, my granddaughter, clung to my cardigan and cried quietly into my shoulder. "You'll stay with us now, right, Grandma?" she whispered. And Ethan, eyes still red, said, "You shouldn't be alone. We've got the space. It'll be good for everyone." So I packed up 47 years of memories. I took only what fit in 2 suitcases, left the rest, the wedding china, Harold's books, the antique clock we never got fixed to be sorted later. There was something they didn't know, something I had never said. Harold and I had been careful. Frugal, some would say. Meticulous, others. Over the years, we had built a small fortune. Through wise investments, compound interest, and one very unexpected inheritance from Harold's aunt, a quiet librarian who had never married and died with nearly $2 million to her name. By the time Harold passed, our assets totaled just over $8 million, and I told no one. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I wanted to see who they were, when they thought I had nothing. Moving in was quiet at first. Beth greeted me with a tight smile. The guest room had fresh sheets and a lavender candle. Sophia had drawn a picture for Mimi in a big chair, Harold beside me with a halo and her holding both our hands. I placed it gently on the nightstand. For the first few weeks, everything felt tentative but polite. Beth let me cook sometimes. Ethan asked about Harold now and then. Sophia read with me in the evenings, her head on my lap like when she was little. It was manageable, until it wasn't. It started with the small things, my knitting basket in the way. My television shows too old-fashioned. Beth began sighing louder when I offered to help. Ethan began staying at work later. Then one morning, I came down the stairs and heard Beth on the phone. She was in the kitchen, her voice light but sharp. She just sits there, quiet, staring. Honestly, it's like having a dog that doesn't bark. I mean, she's sweet, but also just there. I stood still, one hand on the railing. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't hiding. She didn't think I was listening, or worse, she didn't care. That day I baked a pie. Harold's favorite apple and cinnamon with brown sugar crust. No one ate it. Beth said she was watching her sugar. Ethan was too tired. Sophia was at a friend's house. I wrapped the pie in foil and placed it on the counter. The next morning, it was in the trash. Not a slice missing. Beth stopped including me in Sophia's school events. Ethan started locking the home office. One day they moved my recliner into the garage to make space for Christmas decorations, even though it was barely October. Another day the charger for my tablet went missing. When I asked about it, Beth shrugged. "Maybe it's time for a tech upgrade, Margaret," as if the issue was my outdated device, not the lack of respect. And still I stayed quiet, because I told myself I was imagining it, that grief made people strange, that I was being too sensitive. But deep down, I knew better. One evening I asked Beth if I could join her in picking Sophia up from ballet. She looked up from her phone, then said flatly, "You know, maybe today isn't the best day. We're on a tight schedule." And that was that. I began writing in a journal every night. Just a few sentences. Observations, really. Beth rolled her eyes when I offered to do dishes. Ethan looked through me when I said good morning. Sophia whispered she missed the old house. Each line carved something out of me, and still, I smiled. Still, I cooked. Still, I endured. Because I was waiting to see what the silence would reveal. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, Ethan came home early. I was knitting in the living room when he sat down, eyes nervous. Mom, Beth and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time you had your own place. I put down the needles. Oh, it's just, Sophia needs her own room soon, and Beth's been working from home more. We think you'd be more comfortable, somewhere quieter. Somewhere quieter. Quieter than a home where no one spoke to me. I nodded slowly. Of course. That makes sense. That night in the quiet of my borrowed room, I opened the small safe in my suitcase. Inside were the original trust documents. Every account, every investment, every digit, still intact. 172, 365, 34, and not a single cent spent. They didn't ask if I needed help moving. Didn't help find a place. Didn't even ask where I was going. I found a one-bedroom near a park, close enough for Sophia to visit. Not that anyone ever asked for the address. On my first night alone, I made Harold's tea. 4 minutes, Earl Grey, just like always. And I whispered, "They think I have nothing. Let's see how they act when they believe that." Then I folded the trust papers back into their envelope, placed them in the bottom drawer, and waited. My new apartment smelled like old wood and someone else's memories. The floor creaked in ways that made the silence feel louder, and the radiator hissed in protest every time I turned the heat on. But it was mine. The first place that had truly belonged to me since Harold passed. And yet, for the first few weeks, I barely touched anything. I didn't even unpack all the boxes. I just waited. Waited for someone to check in, waited for Ethan to call, waited for Sophia to knock on my door, giggling with excitement like she used to. But the phone stayed silent, and the door never knocked. I told myself I was being overly sentimental. After all, people get busy, families move on. Beth had always been a little distant, and Ethan, well, he wasn't Harold. He wasn't raised to feel what wasn't said. But still, I waited. On my third night in the apartment, I cooked a full dinner out of habit. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, just as Harold liked it. I sat at the small kitchen table, alone, 3 places set. Then I laughed at myself and put the other 2 plates in the fridge. When I checked my phone that night, there were no messages. Not from Ethan, not from Beth, not even Sophia. Just a missed call from Lily. Lily was my saving grace. She was my age, sharp-tongued but warm-hearted, and had the bluntness of someone who had stopped apologizing decades ago. She showed up on Friday with a thermos of chicken soup, a pack of peppermint tea, and 2 slices of lemon cake. "You didn't move into this dusty shoebox just to disappear," she said, pushing past me into the apartment like she owned it. "So don't you dare act like Wallpaper Margaret. I will peel you off this wall myself." We sat together that night, drinking tea, listening to the soft hum of the fridge. "They haven't called, have they?" she asked. I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. A week later, Ethan texted Hope, "You're getting settled, Mom. Let us know if you need anything." It was so sterile I almost laughed. He hadn't asked for my address, hadn't offered to help move. Just, "Let us know," I replied with a polite, "Thank you." "I'm doing okay. Tell Sophia I miss her." No response. That was the moment something in me shifted. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was more like a quiet realization that I was no longer seen as family, but as a social responsibility they had finally offloaded. And worse, they believed I was lucky they didn't charge me rent while I stayed. I started keeping a second journal. Not for daily thoughts, no. For documentation. Beth's passive-aggressive remarks, Ethan's growing silence, the way Sophia's drawings stopped arriving in the mail. Every small fracture, every cold shoulder, every erasure, I wrote it all down. Because if I had nothing else, I would at least have proof that I hadn't imagined it. One afternoon, while sorting through Harold's old paperwork, I came across the envelope we had labeled "For Later." Inside were copies of the trust, the property deeds, and a note in Harold's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't let them treat you like wallpaper Maggie. You're the woman who built every room they're standing in. I read that line over and over. You built every room they're standing in. And yet, they had handed me a suitcase like a stranger. I made an appointment with our lawyer. Mr. Aldridge was a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and a tie always just slightly crooked. He welcomed me into his office with a gentle smile. It's been too long, Margaret. I was sorry to hear about Harold. I nodded, then laid the trust on his desk. I want to update the terms. Of course. Are you looking to include anyone new? I'm looking to remove some people. He blinked. Understood. That evening, I cooked just enough for one. No leftovers. No second plate to refrigerate in false hope. I lit a candle for Harold, then opened my laptop and logged into the online banking app. $8.172, $365.34, untouched. Growing quietly. They had no idea. The next day, I received an email. Beth had accidentally CC'd me on a thread meant for a real estate agent. Subject: selling the house. Timeline plus appraisal request. Her message read, "Too many old memories. We're hoping to remodel and flip for a profit. Can we list by early spring?" I stared at the screen. Old memories. That was the home I brought Ethan back from the hospital to, where Harold planted his rose bushes, where we carved pumpkins and danced in the kitchen and held each other through every storm. Now it was a real estate flip. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded the deed still in my name as co-owner to Mr. Aldridge. Kindly inform the involved parties that I will require written consent before any sale. Sophia called that night, just for 2 minutes, just enough to break my heart. Grandma, why aren't you coming to my school play? Mommy said you were too tired. I bit my tongue. I would never miss your play if I was invited, sweetheart. You'll be wonderful. I miss you. I miss you too, baby. So much. She hung up quickly, probably before Beth noticed. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around my tea, and I whispered to the steam rising from the cup, "You tried to replace me with distance, but all you did was make room for me to grow sharper." The following Sunday, I wore my best cardigan and went to the park near Sophia's school. I didn't call anyone, didn't ask permission, just sat on the bench Harold used to love and watched the world go by. 2 children ran past me chasing bubbles. A couple argued gently about how much sugar to put in the lemonade, and I existed, freely, without apology. That night, I wrote in the journal they stopped seeing me, but I've never seen them clearer. I started researching charities, women's shelters, scholarship funds, microloans for single mothers trying to start businesses. Because if my own family didn't value my existence, I would make sure someone else did. I used to think bitterness was a choice, that if you just stayed grateful, kept counting blessings, and avoided resentment, you could outrun it. That if you forgave quickly, gave people the benefit of the doubt, and tucked your pain away neatly like a napkin on your lap, it wouldn't fester. I was wrong. Bitterness doesn't arrive at your door screaming. It creeps in through the window when you're not looking, when your back is turned, when you're still telling yourself it's not a big deal, when you're still making excuses for people who haven't looked you in the eyes in weeks. The apartment I lived in had a draft. No matter how high I turned the heat, the cold slipped through the windows like judgment. My body adjusted to the chill. But my heart, that stayed cold longer than I care to admit. Beth didn't call, not once. Ethan texted maybe twice a month, short messages without punctuation, the kind of check-ins HR departments are required to send employees on medical leave. And Sophia. I missed her voice the most, her small hands in mine, her soft whispers when we read together in the evenings. But I didn't call. I refused to be the one begging for scraps of affection from the very people who discarded me like a piece of old furniture. One morning, I passed by a local coffee shop and saw a familiar scene through the glass: Beth, Ethan, and Sophia sitting at a table, laughing, smiling, sharing pancakes. I stood there on the sidewalk, invisible. They hadn't told me they were in the neighborhood, hadn't invited me, hadn't thought of me. I stared for a moment too long. Beth looked up. Our eyes met. Her expression didn't change. Not a flicker of surprise, not guilt. She simply turned back to her coffee. That was the moment something inside me curdled. The bitterness came quickly after that. It colored the way I looked at old photographs. I stopped smiling at Ethan's childhood pictures. Stopped rereading Harold's letters because even those now reminded me of what I'd lost, what I was tolerating, and who was no longer standing beside me to help shoulder it. I even stopped wearing my wedding ring, not out of anger toward Harold, but because it felt like a symbol of a family I no longer belonged to. Lily noticed. She came by one evening with a stack of old magazines and a bag of lemon shortbread cookies. "You've stopped humming," she said, settling into the armchair opposite mine. "Did I hum that much before?" "Yes. Like a kettle always ready to boil. Now you're just simmering." I chuckled. But she was right. I wasn't angry. I was something worse. I was restrained. I started walking every afternoon. It helped. But not always. Once I saw a woman about my age being helped across the street by her son. He held her hand gently, like she was precious. I found myself staring again. Then she turned to him and said something, and they both laughed. A real shared laugh. And I went home and cried into the sleeve of my cardigan like a child. Around that time, I began receiving real estate flyers in the mail. Some of them were addressed to the Halston estate. Others simply said, "To resident." Apparently, Beth and Ethan had officially listed the house, the one Harold and I built with our own hands, the one with the white shutters, the rose garden, the backyard oak tree where Ethan had broken his arm at age 9. They were selling it for profit. No one asked if I wanted to walk through it one last time. No one checked if I wanted anything from it. Not the books, not the garden tools, not the wedding photo that once hung over the fireplace. They'd moved on, efficiently, ruthlessly. I mailed a letter. To Beth, short, direct. "Please note that any sale of the Halston property requires my written approval as per the deed enclosed. Kindly loop in your realtor with my attorney, Mr. Aldridge. Margaret." She never replied. But 2 days later, I received a voicemail from Ethan. "Mom, I didn't realize. Beth said we thought everything was transferred already. I'll have Mr. Aldridge call me, okay?" He sounded nervous, maybe for the first time. I didn't return the call. Instead, I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the couch, letting the bitterness soak deep into my bones. It wasn't about the house. It was about how quickly people reveal their truth when they think you're powerless. How easily love turns conditional. How fast children forget who held them at 3 a.m. when they were sick and scared and crying. One day, while walking through the grocery store, I saw Sophia. She was with Beth holding onto the cart, looking bored. I stepped forward. "Sophia," I called softly. She looked up. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she smiled. "Grandma." But Beth turned around, saw me, and placed a firm hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Come on, sweetie, we're running late." Sophia looked back at me as she was pulled away. No wave, no goodbye, just confusion. I stood there, heart pounding, surrounded by canned peas and cereal boxes. Like I didn't belong anywhere. I went home that day and took out my journals. Every entry, every note. I spread them across the kitchen table like evidence in a trial only I could attend. They didn't know what I had. Not just the money, but the memories, the sacrifices, the patience. I had built this family, brick by brick, holiday by holiday, sacrifice by sacrifice, and they couldn't even be bothered to say thank you. That night I wrote a new entry. They've forgotten who I am. But I remember everything, and someday they'll wish they had. Bitterness, I learned, is only the middle of the story. If you sit with it too long, it turns you cruel. But if you let it settle, if you study it, it becomes something sharper, something useful, like a lens. And through that lens, I began to observe. I stopped hoping for phone calls. I stopped checking for text messages that wouldn't come. Instead, I listened. I watched. The absence of my family didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a window had opened. I could finally see them clearly, not just as the people I loved, but as people. Flawed, messy, driven by ego and fear, and most of all, entitlement. Ethan called only when he needed something, always under the guise of small talk. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How's the apartment?" And then a few minutes later, "Beth and I have been thinking about expanding. You know the market's so hot right now, but these property taxes, man, they're a nightmare." I'd smile into the phone, say, and oh, really let him ramble. Never offered a cent, never mentioned the $8 million. I let him sit in the discomfort of not knowing. One evening, I received an email from Sophia's school, a fundraiser event, parents and grandparents invited, open RSVP. They hadn't told me, of course they hadn't, but I RSVP'd anyway, quietly, without telling them. That Friday night, I put on my best navy cardigan and the pearl earrings Harold gave me on our 25th anniversary. I walked into that school gym with my head high and my heart braced. Beth's face when she saw me was a blend of surprise and control. She didn't hug me, didn't smile. "Oh, you came," she said as if I were a stranger at a birthday party. Ethan gave a sheepish wave. Sophia, bless her, lit up like a firefly. She ran to me and hugged me so tight my ribs ached. "Grandma, I missed you so much you didn't tell me you were coming. I wanted to surprise you." And then I watched Beth step forward and gently pull Sophia back. "Let's get ready, sweetie. You don't want to be late for your part." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. But it was deliberate. A message not just to Sophia, but to me. You are not welcome. So I sat 3 rows behind them, not next to Ethan, not beside Sophia, alone. And I watched, listened, observed every polite smile, every glance, every quiet signal Beth sent to keep her world tightly curated and under control. It was like watching a performance. Not Sophia's, Beth's. A woman desperate to seem kind while quietly cutting out every thread that didn't match her narrative. When the show ended, I waited. Sophia found me again. "Did you like my song? You were perfect. I drew something for you, but Mommy said you don't live close anymore." I swallowed hard. "You can always draw. I'll always be close enough to see." Beth appeared seconds later. "Sophia, go grab your coat, okay?" Then to me, Margaret, "It's probably best if you don't show up unannounced. It confuses her, as if love had an appointment book." That night I didn't cry. I brewed my tea, turned on my lamp, and pulled out my journal. And I wrote Beth fears chaos. She controls what she cannot love. She manages what she doesn't understand. Then I added, Ethan is not cruel. He's just afraid to rock the boat that carries him. And finally, Sophia still sees me. So I must remain visible on my own terms. The next morning I went to the bank. Not to withdraw, not to donate, but to observe. I asked to sit with the private wealth manager. He was a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed, overly polite, until I handed him the portfolio summary from Mr. Aldridge. Then his posture straightened. "Mrs. Halston, I had no idea. Would you be interested in estate planning strategies or philanthropic investments?" I smiled. "Not yet. But someday soon. For now, I just want to know how visible I am to people who matter." I spent the next week visiting places, the public library, the community garden, a small women's shelter across town. No press, no donations, just listening. I met women who had nothing but still gave, volunteers who didn't know my name but made room for me anyway, teenagers who offered their seat without being told to. They didn't know about my wealth, didn't care, and for the first time in a long while I felt seen, not as a burden, not as a problem, just as a person. Then came the phone call. Beth, not Ethan. Beth. "Hi, Margaret. I was wondering if we could talk." I paused, made her wait 5 seconds. Of course. She arrived that afternoon with store-bought cookies and a smile too wide to trust. "Ethan and I have been thinking a lot. About family, about unity. And we just feel terrible. Truly. You've done so much for us. And we hate that you're so far." I said nothing. She kept going. "We want to invite you to dinner next week. Just the 4 of us. No pressure. Just reconnecting." I watched her closely. "That's very kind of you." Her smile flickered. She wasn't expecting politeness. She was expecting a confrontation she could deflect. "We really want Sophia to have her grandmother in her life again," she added. "Then I suppose I never left." She blinked, then regaining control. "Great. We'll see you Tuesday at 6. She left smiling, but I knew the truth. Beth was nervous. Something had shifted. Maybe she suspected. Maybe not about the exact amount, but she knew I had something now. Some power she couldn't quite place. That Tuesday I dressed with intention. Dark green blouse, pearl earrings, simple heels. Not for vanity, for clarity. I was no one's ghost, no one's afterthought. When I arrived, Sophia greeted me with a running hug. Ethan smiled awkwardly. Beth offered wine. We sat. We talked. Surface level, polite, rehearsed. And I observed. Beth kept glancing at Ethan. He kept clearing his throat. Finally, dessert arrived. Store-bought again. Beth leaned forward. Margaret, we've been thinking. With the house selling and some new financial pressures, we wondered if you'd consider helping us invest in a new property. Just temporarily, as a family. I set my fork down, looked at both of them. I appreciate your honesty. Beth smiled. So, is that something you'd be open to? I smiled back. Let me think about it. They thought that was a yes. It wasn't. It was a mirror. And they didn't yet know what they looked like in it. That night I wrote, "Observation is power. Silence is strategy. Let them build their tower of assumptions. I've already bought the ground beneath it. They say when a volcano erupts, it doesn't come from nowhere. It builds in silence. Underneath. Pressure forming in layers. Magma swelling beneath stillness. And when it finally breaks, the world changes shape." For months I had been the quiet grandmother, the woman who waited, who smiled at doorsteps and RSVP'd without complaint, who nodded politely when asked to move aside. But I had also been the woman who watched, who listened, who took notes. And now I was the woman who would speak. It started on a Thursday. Beth called again. "Hi, Margaret. Just following up on the investment conversation. Have you had a chance to think it over?" I could hear her smile through the phone. That professional cheerfulness with a tremor beneath. "I have," I replied calmly. "Would Saturday evening work for everyone? I'd like to invite you over to my place." Silence, then a cough. "Oh, sure. Yes. We'll bring dessert. No need. Everything will be provided." That Saturday I spent the entire morning preparing. Not a dinner, a statement. I set the table with Harold's old silverware, lit the candle he always reserved for anniversaries, set out linen napkins, and in the center of the table, instead of flowers, I placed one simple thing, a folder with my full financial documents, the original trust, and a new letter written by me. I didn't hide the contents, didn't dramatize it, just left it there, quiet waiting. They arrived late. Beth was in heels too tall for her stride. Ethan wore a blazer he hadn't ironed. Sophia ran in and hugged me, her innocence shielding her from what would soon unfold. I hugged her tight. "Go look in the den, sweetheart. There's a surprise waiting." She skipped away, and I turned to her parents. "Please, sit." We sat. For a moment the room was filled with small talk. Weather, Sophia's grades. Beth tried to steer the conversation to family legacy and smart decisions. I let her talk. Let Ethan nod along. Then I reached for the folder. "Before we discuss anything further, I think you should read this." I slid the folder across the table. Beth opened it. First page bank statements, second investment accounts, third property deeds. By the fourth page, her mouth had parted slightly. "This is yours," I nodded. "And Harold's. He left everything to me, knowing I would use it wisely." Ethan leaned in. "8 million, Mom." "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at him steady. "Because you never asked. Not really. You assumed I was a burden, and you treated me like one." Beth laughed, that sharp laugh people use when they feel the ground shift. "We never, Margaret, come on. That's not fair. We offered to let you stay." "Let me," I cut in, voice calm but steely. "You gave me a guest room like I was a tenant. You pushed me out during the asset division as if I were a leftover. You used words like simplify and downsizing, but what you meant was you no longer fit in the picture." They were silent. I let it happen. I watched. I waited. And now I'm telling you this. I have no intention of funding a lifestyle built on disrespect. Ethan leaned back, stunned. Beth tried again. "Margaret, I didn't realize you felt this way. You should have said something." I did. Every time I showed up. Every time I stayed silent. That was me speaking. You just didn't want to listen. Sophia returned holding a small quilt I had sewn for her. She didn't notice the tension. Didn't hear the storm beneath the silence. "Look what Grandma made." Beth stood up abruptly. Sweetie, go get your coat. But I just got here now. Sophia looked at me. Are you coming with us, Grandma? No, darling. But I'll see you again soon. Very soon. They left. No hugs, no dessert, no thank you. Just a door that closed behind them too quickly. That night, I opened the wine I had saved for Christmas, sat by the window, and let the silence bloom. The next morning, I emailed Mr. Aldridge. Subject, estate update. Please remove Ethan and Beth from the primary beneficiary list. Replace with Sophia Halston. To receive all holdings upon her 25th birthday contingent on full-time education or documented employment. In the interim, funds are to be placed in a charitable trust supporting women over 60 who have been displaced or abandoned by family. I hit send, then poured my tea. 2 days later, the calls started. Ethan, then Beth, then again. Voicemail after voicemail. Mom, this is ridiculous. We were just confused. Can we please talk, Margaret? You're being emotional. Let's be reasonable. You're punishing us for a misunderstanding. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A week later, Sophia's school called. The principal had overheard Sophia saying, my grandma's rich, but it's a secret. She wasn't in trouble, just confused. I smiled. Tell her it's okay. The truth always finds the light. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. That weekend, I hosted a gathering at the women's shelter I'd been visiting. No press, no big announcements, just stories, laughter, shared grief, healing. These women had faced abandonment like me. They had built homes for others only to be pushed out. They had loved, endured, and been forgotten. We weren't bitter, we were reclaiming. One woman, Ruth, asked me quietly, why now? Why tell your family? I smiled. Because silence only serves them if it stays hidden. Once you reveal it, it becomes strength. She nodded. So what now? Now I build something they can't erase. In the weeks after the reveal, the phone calls stopped. At first they came every day, then every other, then silence. Not the kind of silence that hurts anymore, just quiet. Like a room that's finally been cleared of shouting. I had thought that moment would feel triumphant, that I'd dance around my kitchen or toast the air with a smirk. But the truth was quieter, softer. Because when you finally stop waiting for people to see you, to choose you, or to love you the right way, that's when the real healing begins. One morning I took a walk down the path behind my building. The leaves were turning. Gold, amber, fire red, each one falling in its own time. No one rushing, no one apologizing. I thought of Harold, of how he used to rake the leaves into piles just so Sophia could jump in them. I thought of our house, the rose garden, the laughter, the decades we built with care. It was gone now, but the memory still alive, still warm. I went to the post office and mailed a small package to Sophia. Inside, a handwritten letter, a photo of Harold holding her as a baby, and a tiny golden key. No instructions, just a note. For when the world makes you doubt what you're worth. This key opens something only you will inherit. But more importantly, it reminds you that love leaves behind locks only truth can open. Always, Grandma. 3 days later, Beth emailed. Not to yell, not to threaten, just 4 words, you've made your point. No greeting, no signature. I closed the laptop, smiled faintly, and poured myself a second cup of tea. On Saturdays, I volunteered at the shelter's writing group. We called it Women of Quiet Power. There were 12 of us, each with stories too heavy to say out loud at first. We wrote, we cried, we laughed. Ruth, who'd been left on a hospital bench by her son. Miriam, whose daughter blocked her after a divorce. Lila, who hadn't spoken to her grandkids in 4 years. But in that room, we weren't abandoned. We were authors. We were matriarchs reclaiming our narratives. Ethan showed up once, unannounced, late afternoon, holding a grocery bag with a pie I knew he hadn't baked. Hey, Mom. Hello, Ethan. He sat down, fidgeted. Sophia misses you. She's been asking about the key. It's hers. She'll understand it one day. He sighed. I didn't know how much I was hurting you. You didn't want to know. He nodded slowly. Is it too late? I looked at him. Really looked. He had Harold's eyes, but none of Harold's steadiness. For a clean slate, maybe, but not for a new chapter. He nodded. Didn't cry. Didn't beg. but I think he understood. I never saw Beth again, not in person. She sent an email once more months later after seeing Sophia post a photo with me at the shelter's garden. Her tone was civil, terse. Sophia seems happy. That's what matters. I didn't reply. Sometimes the most graceful ending is no answer at all. Sophia came to visit in the spring. She was taller now, eyes brighter, still carrying that key on a chain around her neck. "Did you ever regret not telling them sooner?" she asked one day as we sipped lemonade on the porch. I thought for a long moment. No. The silence gave me clarity. The truth gave me peace, and the money I smiled. It gave me options, but not worth, that I always had. That summer I traveled, alone, Paris, Vermont, a small cabin by the lake where I read poetry and spoke to no one for days. It wasn't about escape. It was about return. Return to myself. I updated my will again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted the words to reflect who I'd become. To Sophia, everything I own, not because she's family by blood, but because she saw me when others looked away. To the women of quiet power, 10% of my estate divided evenly. May their voices never go unheard again. To Ethan, a letter sealed. In it, I wrote, "You were my son first, before you were a husband, before you were a father. I will always love that boy, but I will not fund the man who forgets the hands that raised him." In the final pages of my journal, I wrote, "The sweetest victories are not the loud ones. They're the ones where you reclaim yourself, without apology, without revenge, just presence, just peace. Now I rise with the sun, I water my plants, I answer Sophia's calls. And every once in a while I reread the letter Harold wrote me on our 30th anniversary. You are the anchor when storms come, the mirror that never distorts, and the compass when others lose their way. I never needed $8 million to prove my worth. All I needed was the space to remember it. If you've ever felt dismissed or pushed out of the lives of those you love, don't stay silent forever. Sometimes your quiet is the loudest form of resistance. Share your story in the comments. Someone out there may be living the same pain, and your voice might help them find their way back to themselves. What time is it where you're watching this ending? Where are you? Let me know so together we can prove those who were once overlooked now have a voice.